Peter Ladner, our guest. He's a journalist, a former civic politician, as you probably know, and he has a bit of farm in him, I think. Was Ladner named after your family?
Ladner was named after my family, and when my great-grandfather and his brother first came there, they were draining the land to try to grow things. They ended up in the fish canning business, though.
Okay, so hence, aquaponics, is that what it's called?
Aquaponics is a way that you can grow fish in a tank, and the fish waste is pumped up above it to where, let's say, watercress or some greens grow, and they take all the nutrition out of the waste, grow big and strong and healthy and make money, and then the clean water comes back in and it just goes round and around.
Freshwater fish, saltwater fish, does it matter?
Freshwater fish.
Freshwater fish, so I can grow a trout.
Tilapia is the fish species that's most commonly grown in these tanks, but you can grow trout. In Agassiz, there's a tank up there that's growing trout, and the waste goes over to an adjacent garden that grows greens and all kinds of things.
Okay, and it doesn't mix with the other fish or anything. It's totally self-contained.
Yep.
So we're not talking fish farm.
Land-based,
Land-based.
self-contained, indoors.
Indoors.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So this is something, in fact, somebody's experimenting with this at Windermere High School here in Vancouver. They're trying to get one of these going. And I visited a place in Milwaukee that's got one happening, and there are other people who are seriously going into this business all over the place.
So what about the schools? Food in the schools. Where should we start? But in the schools, why not?
Well, certainly the obesity explosion starts in the schools. One way to combat it can start in the schools, but the kids are fattening up as they're in school. And a lot of work is being done to educate kids about what they're eating. There's a great program that's called Spuds and Tubs that comes out of Vancouver. The Fraser Valley farmers bring certain species of potatoes into school, and the kids grow the potatoes and they watch them and they measure them and they do recipes and all that, and then they eat them and learn how to cook them properly.
I know in the inner cities, and certainly in New York, they had that program where the kids that came from low-income families got to grow gardens, harvest, watch the beets grow, make the beets.
There's a lot of that going on. I predict that within 10 years, every school will have a garden, and that garden, the food from that garden will be part of the curriculum. And in many cases, the good ones, that food will be eaten in the school cafeteria too.
And perhaps we'll go down to the root cellar instead of to the corner store, because when you look at corner stores, and again, you pointed out in the urban food revolution, in a city like Chicago, New York, Vancouver, what's in the corner store? Lotto tickets, cigarettes, in the States, alcohol, newspapers.
I've got a picture of a store there from Chicago that says fresh meats, and all the ads in the windows are for booze. So a lot of inner cities don't, especially in the U.S., don't have access to good food.
What about food safety? And I mean by that, the USDA controls it in the United States, but if you're growing your own, is there going to be a watchdog who watches over that, or will it just be anybody can grow whatever they want, or what?
Well, that's one of the things I talk about in the book, is how do you get the bureaucracy involved or not involved in all of this? And the general trend seems to be just leave the bureaucrats out. Because if it's something that's grown locally, you and I can check and see where it was grown, and if you have any doubts about the place, don't buy it or don't go near it.
Right.
And people are learning how to test the soil or use raised beds to get out of the contaminated soil. And the inspector in Vancouver has said, we're not really concerned if somebody wants to grow something in a garden and sell it at the farmer's market. We're going to assume it's going to be okay.
Okay, and the farmers markets, some people think they're a bit elitist and expensive, but when you do the math, not so.
Well, I get into that a little bit in the book, and the question really is, yes, they are generally more expensive, seems to be the impression you get when you go there, but then you have to ask, what are you getting as far as flavor and nutrition? And I quote a fellow in the book who analyzed the modern tomato and went to the growers and said, what are your characteristics you look for? And they're looking for yield per acre and uniformity and ability to ripen in the truck. And flavor and nutrition were not on their list anywhere. So if you're actually buying better flavor, better nutrition at the farmer's market, you may be in fact getting better value for your dollar, even though the tomato costs more.
Makes sense to me. I I remember that there was a scientist in California many moons ago who was trying to make a square tomato. I don't know if he succeeded, but apparently if you make a square tomato, you get more in a box.
Yeah.
Right? It was all about transportation and more in the box, and I think you pick them green and just hope for the best. So the sun doesn't turn the tomato red. Something does. Don't know.
So if you grow it in your backyard, you know it's going to be healthy, you know where it came from, and you know what went into it.
So urban food revolution, how does it create jobs? Example.
Well, there's a whole discussion about a local, if you buy locally, you're supporting a local farmer, and if there are enough local farmers working, then they have some equipment suppliers that are that get work. And it's the same argument about buying anything local. So there are a lot of movements about local procurement, so that if you could get the state institutions or the provincial institutions, the schools, hospitals, jails, to be buying, say, 10% of their produce or their food locally, you can stimulate the economy to some degree. And that's, I think, the biggest potential for economic development.
Sure, and having worked at the city level, as you did, you know about zoning and policy making.
Well, yeah, and the zoning speaks to the whole question of agricultural lands, and I talk about that too, because really, the urban food is never going to be the main source of our food. It's always going to be coming from agricultural lands. But cities are stepping on and sprawling over agricultural lands. So I found out that the agricultural land reserve that we have is actually a model for North America for preserving agricultural lands. And a lot of places dream of having such restrictions.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. And you know, it's always controversial, always has been.
It's not easy, but if you put a priority on growing food and preserving the capacity to grow local food, that's where you have to go.
Sure. Food waste. You know how much we waste, and we waste sometimes because of safety issues, I know, but when you think of the big banquets and whatever happens, and how can we somehow use food to its capacity?
There are a number of ways. About half the food that gets grown gets wasted. So starting in the fields, I've talked to farmers in the Fraser Valley, if their carrots are not 8 inches long, they can't sell them. So a 7-inch carrot, a 6-inch carrot is no good. So one way is to start with online services which have grown up, and there's one here in the Lower Mainland where you can go online, farm folk, city folk have such a service. And if you're looking for carrots at your restaurant, and the farmer says, I got these 6-inch carrots, let's get together, and they start to use those ones that were previously wasted.
Yeah, who cares? I always found smaller carrots a little tastier myself.
Well,
you know, where you pluck the carrot out of the garden and it tastes pretty good, whether it's big or small.
Well, the reason we have the cheapest food costs in history are that there's standardization and efficiencies that come from those kind of measures.
So what about other projects around this, composting projects, worm bins?
Well, the other part of waste is that once the food works its way down the system and is either in your fridge and it's gone moldy, or it's on your plate and you didn't finish it, or you can't eat it, or whatever, then where does it go? And in the Lower Mainland, we are mandating that all organic waste comes out of the landfill by 2015. So where's it going to go? So on the one hand, we need to deal with this and turn it into compost, or maybe some people talk about burning it. And on the other hand, we've got all these urban farmers and gardeners starting up that want soil. So there's a challenge in figuring out how to do mid-scale composting in the city in a way that doesn't cause excessive odors and pest issues, and is somehow financially feasible, and feeds soil into the gardens and also deals with that waste.
And pest control, when you're growing a garden, always an issue, so we can do that organically. I know there's certainly beekeepers on the roofs of some of the fancy hotels.
There are beekeepers on the roofs of the
Ladybugs
hotels and
galore.
on the roofs of city halls, and there are also herb gardens and food gardens on the hotels right within view of where we are here.
Sure. What about a tax break? Something like a tax break. You grow an urban garden, you get a tax break.
Well, already...
What do you think, Councillor?
If you're a farmer, so-called farmer, and you meet a minimum volume of produce every year, you can be classified as a farm. So we have a lot of issues with hobby farms, these little plots in the ALR. Big houses, a nominal farm, and they get the tax break. The city of Victoria has done a lot of work on this, and you can farm your front garden, but you cannot get reclassified as a farm.
I understand. Condominiums, many people live in towers. Are there some entrepreneurial ideas things people can do who live in the glass towers?
There are a couple of things, several things they can do. One is just there's some very modern kind of things you can put on your balcony to make it, you can grow in different levels, and it's got automatic watering. So you can actually grow on your balcony.
Right.
A lot of them have community gardens, or they're converting their lands around them for food. And there's one in Vancouver that has a rooftop garden that was intended for the residents, but they didn't use it. So it's now being farmed commercially by an urban farmer.
So really you have to make the economies of urbanism pay down the line. That's always good.
Making this all pay and add up financially is a challenge, because there are now in Vancouver about 20 different people or organizations that are in the urban farming business. They're commercially farming city property, but they don't really make a great living, but they make enough that you can start to look at it as a way to make some kind of a living or part-time income.
Well, Vancouver is the perfect place for this because it's easy to grow things here.
Well, we think it's easy to grow.
In Edmonton.
It is easier than Edmonton, but then you think of places further south, and it's even easier there. But I went to Milwaukee to the Will Allen's Growing Power Center there, and that's a pretty rough prairie kind of cold winter place. And they've got hoop houses, which is just a shed which has just got plastic over top of it. And they actually heat it with compost around the edge, which, as you know, stays warm.
Sure.
And so they're growing things indoors year-round. And this is possible. A little bit of technological help, you can do a lot.
Do you have one at your house, an urban garden?
I do have an urban garden at my house, an urban farm. I've grown my own food, well, not all my own food, but I've had vegetables and fruit forever.
Oh, nice to see you
Thanks,
again.
Fanny.
Hey, thank you. The Urban Food Revolution, Changing the Way We Feed Cities, Peter Ladner.